Good morning. Today is the 7th day of Tammuz, the 26th of June. And we're learning a short essay from the Alter Rebbe. And it's on page 403 of Ma'amrei Admur Hazaken HaKetzarim, from the short essays. And it says on top that it's from Tikkunim, but it's not exactly from Tikkunim. If anywhere, it's from Zohar Chadash. I seem to remember that the Rebbe once gave a different source for this, but I haven't had time to track it down. I seem to remember that there's an exact source. In any case, it says here, Ita b'Tikkunim. It says in the Tikkunei Zohar, שאפילו אם היה צדיק אחד חוזר בתשובה שלמה בדורו, היה בא משיח. That if there was even one consummate tzaddik who would do tshuva, then the Mashiach would come. That's all you need, one. So here they give the source in Zohar Chadash, Sof Parashat Noach. And just a few words about the Zohar Chadash as far as I know. Zohar Chadash is not really a new Zohar. Nobody could write a new Zohar. But when the Zohar was being printed in Cremona and in the Mantua, which are like, I think, 70 kilometers apart in northern Italy. So they were being printed at the same time. So there were two teams of scholars that were sitting on the manuscripts that they had, and they decided what would go in and what wouldn't go in. It was sort of like the editing room of a movie, where you get all the pieces of leftover film on the floor, and so then they took what was left over and they put it in a gniza, because they decided not to put it in for whatever reason the reason was. Nobody knows. Years later, not very many years, I think. 100 years later, something like that, they took the gniza out, and new Talmidei Chachamim looked at it and said, "Why is this not in the Zohar? This is perfectly fine." So there could be many reasons, I don't know what, but all these pieces put together were the Zohar Chadash, all the stuff that didn't make it into the original edit, the original cut, as they call. So you got the editor's cut afterwards. In any case, so it says there that Rabbi Eliezer says that the Mashiach can only come when everybody does tshuva. So Rabbi Akiva, I think there, which is kind of, maybe this was the reason it didn't make it in the Zohar, because Rabbi Akiva is not normally in the Zohar. So he asks him, how could we possibly have a situation in which everybody from one end of the world to the other end of the world is going to do tshuva at the same time? So Rabbi Eliezer says, I didn't mean that everybody has to do tshuva. I meant that it's enough for one congregation to do tshuva. First he says, for the heads of the congregations to do tshuva, and then he says, one congregation to do tshuva. Knishta, Chada. And the Rebbe quotes this many times. But, so the Rebbe quotes the Knishta Chada. It's in a lot of places. But I seem to remember that he also has a source that says one tzaddik. Because here it doesn't say one tzaddik. Although you could understand Knishta Chada meaning the head of one congregation. So you could be medayik there. You could particularly understand that it's one person. How do we learn this? He says, where does the Zohar get this from? He says, "Dinei ktiv v'aktifu al mei meriva, vayera leMoshe ba'avuram ki imu et rucho vayvate bisvatav." There's a verse in Psalms 106. It says, it's describing what we're going to have in this week's parsha. Right? It's in Barak. No, it wasn't last week's parsha. Right? When's the Mei Meriva? Yeah, last week's parsha. So last week's parsha, we read that they came to him. They said, "There's no water." Rashi says, "Look at how great," and the Rebbe learns from this. Sometimes you don't know what an effect your good actions have. Nobody knows about it. Why? Because Miriam was the reason for the well throughout their journey in the wilderness, and nobody attributed to Miriam. When did they find out? When she passed away. So sometimes people only figure it out when you pass away. They don't know until then. So he says, don't give up. The Rebbe says, don't give up, because it's not about publicity. It's about that even sometimes you don't know that you've been doing this. And then after the person is gone, then suddenly everybody realizes it was in merit of his good deeds. In any case, so they didn't have any water, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu and they asked him for water. And then the whole thing with the stone, with the rock happened. But what does it say? It says what this means is Pirush שהצדיק במעשיו הטובים מקושר הוא בישראל וישראל בו. He says the good deeds of the tzaddik, they affect all of Am Yisrael. They affect the entire Jewish people. And the entire Jewish people take from him, Israel bo, ki Moshe Rabbeinu alav Hashalom. Now let's see what happened in that generation. It says in that generation, Moshe Rabbeinu was a great tzaddik, comes along, and he takes them out of Egypt. And he has a whole generation following him. What happens to that generation? Something that hasn't happened ever since. Everybody received prophecy at the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. So what does that mean? He says, Shikriv elav kol Yisrael ve'elam lemadregato. So what did he do? The tzaddik of the generation makes everybody in his image. It's like he fashions everybody to be like him. So what was Moshe Rabbeinu like? He was the greatest prophet. So that's why we call it Dor De'ah. It was a generation of knowing God. What kind of De'ah? What kind of a knowledge? Knowledge of God. In the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu, Utmunat Hashem Yabit, he sees the world from God's perspective. They also saw the world from God's perspective. Of course, they needed glasses, but that was a different issue. But in principle, the leader of the generation lifts everybody. He elevates everyone to his level. And that's what you expect in every generation. In every generation, the potential is that everybody will become similar to the Rebbe of that generation. So that's true in our generation also, that everybody needs to be like the Rebbe. Now let's see what he says here. He says, it's the same in every generation. The leader lifts everyone to his image. They emulate him. They come to be able to do what he does. Now he says, now if you find that there's a blemish, there's something wrong with the tzaddik of the generation, with the leader of the generation, who's to blame? He says, it's not the person. It's not the tzaddik, it's the people. Because this is not a two-way street.
How can there be a blemish in the tzaddik?
Right? Exactly. There can't be that. By definition, the tzaddik is someone who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. So if anything is wrong with him, it's the people affecting him. Now he doesn't walk around blaming them all day. That's not the point. The point is that he does something wrong, and everybody looks at it and says, what is this? How can this possibly be? So the tzaddik himself is surprised. He says, I didn't want to do that. Where did that come from? So he says that's the effect of the people. And this is very important, that it's not a two-way street. It's not that he affects the people and the people affect him equally. He affects the people by having them emulate his good deeds. And the people affect him by bringing him down to suffer from their problems. Now anybody who hears this and says, oh, what kind of leadership is this? You blame the people for everything that's wrong, and you take all the credit for everything that's good. Okay, what can I do? If that's how you want to live your life, and that's how you want to treat the tzaddik, okay. So that's the type of tzaddikim you'll have. The tzaddikim that you'll blame them for all. Meaning you'll do the other direction. You'll say, oh, they're to blame for everything that I do wrong. But that's victimhood. That's nonsense. The truth is that the tzaddik really is a person who doesn't do anything wrong. He doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. So you can't even say that he did something wrong. He can do something by mistake, he can make a mistake, but that's something else. That's not a Yetzer Hara, that's just a mistake. But if he does something wrong, if he does something that's V'gam Hashem itanaf bi ba'avurchem, he says, that God was angry at me because of you, says Moshe. And again, people can take this the wrong way and say, he's trying to blame the people. But he's not really trying to blame the people, he's saying the truth. And this verse in Psalms, that's exactly what it says. What does it say? Therefore, when they argued about the water and he hit the stone, the sin wasn't because of Moshe. Because there's no chet, there's no sin by Moshe Rabbeinu. But because of his connection, and he knows, this is why it's so hard for the tzaddik. The tzaddik by himself, he has no sins at all. And the fact that he's willing to come down to lead the people is always a risk for him, because they might draw him down to their place. He tries to lift them up as much as he can to his, but they also draw him down to their place. וזהו כי אמרו את רוחו, אמרו לשון ויאמר, שהחליפו רוחו ברוחם. תמורה, you know what תמורה is?
Recompense.
What do you call it?
Recompense.
Why not just exchange?
Okay.
Okay, so recompense is like French. So you have one animal, and it has a mum. There's something wrong with it. So you switch it for another one that doesn't. So it's switching one thing for another, exchanging one thing for another. So it says, "Vayamer ki imru et rucho." The usual meaning is they went against his word. They opposed his word. Himru le'amir is to go against my word, to break my word. I told you to do one thing, and you do the opposite. But here he says, Himru et rucho, they exchanged the spirit. What do you mean they exchanged the spirit? That he received their spirit, and now he was able to sin. Himru et rucho berucham, they exchanged his spirit for theirs.
Bad exchange.
Right. Vayivate bisfatav. And then it says that it doesn't say there that he struck the stone in Tehillim, in Psalms. It says that he spoke ill. Vayivate bisfatav. He uttered with his lips. So says the Alter Rebbe, why does David HaMelech say this? Because of lo haya ela bisfatav, because it was only externally. Because he himself had not changed. It was just their spirit that was acting within him. So that's very important. So now he says, "V'lachen im haya tzadik echad b'shlemut, memela yitnagu Yisrael al hashlemut." He says, if there is one tzaddik in every generation, then he can bring the entire Jewish people to be whole, to be complete, to act perfectly. Dim lo ken lo hayahu b'shlemut. So it goes the other way around. That if the generation is not meritorious of being complete, so who's to blame? Because we said that all the good comes from the leader. So the leader's to blame. He is to blame because it means that he's not complete yet. With Moshe Rabbeinu, we say that you can't say that he wasn't complete. He was complete. But in every other generation, the leader did not attain the state, the highest state that would have affected everyone and made them complete. He says, "Mipnei ma lo yimatzeh tzadik echad b'kol bedor." But it's a big question. Why shouldn't there be in every generation one tzaddik, a consummate tzaddik, who does perfect tshuva, and he stays in perfect tshuva without any evil at all? So if there's a person like this in every generation, so why hasn't the Mashiach come? Right?
Very good question.
So we'll leave with that question. Tomorrow we'll finish with the answers to this question. What?
That means shluft mit the kasha.
Yeah, well, I hope you don't go to sleep now, but
Morgen kommt mit der Tirus.
more than
Morgen kommt mit der Tirus.